This is a demonstration of suturing and the instrument tie. The setup includes a silicone skin model, 3/0 silk suture on a curved needle, tissue forceps, and a needle driver. The tissue forceps are picked up using your index and thumb finger to be held like a pencil, and this gives you maximum control over the instrument. The needle driver is picked up with your ring finger and thumb using your index finger and second finger to support the instrument, again giving you the most control over the instrument. The needle is loaded onto the needle driver so that it is perpendicular to the needle driver itself and 2/3 along the way from the tip. Now you're ready to take your first bite. The wound will be closed using the suture. You'll need to pronate and supinate your hand to get the needle into the tissue properly. The needle should be perpendicular to the tissue when it enters, and this is accomplished best by making sure your arm is pronated nicely. Again, the needle enters perpendicular to the tissue, 3 millimeters from the wound edge, 3 millimeters deep, and exits on the other side 3 millimeters again away from the wound edge. The needle is removed from the tissue, moving along the curve of the needle. The suture is then pulled through, leaving a 4 centimeter tail. The needle is then dropped onto the tissue freely so it doesn't injure anyone. The first loops that you make are actually a double loop. The tail end, which you created earlier, is then picked up with your needle driver and pulled through your loops, making sure that your arms cross over. And this is important so that the suture lies flat in the wound. You see the suture lying nicely and flat right over top of the wound. The next loop is made by placing your needle driver between your two ends. One loop is made this time. The tail end is picked up with the needle driver pulled through the loop, and notice how your hands are uncrossed this time. You pull in opposite directions to tighten down the knot and see how it lies flat. Final knot will be made by creating one loop around the needle driver. The tail end again is picked up and pulled through this loop. The hands are now crossed, as you see here, and the knot lies squarely and flatly down on the tissue. The assistant then cuts the suture. We'll demonstrate this one more time. The needle is loaded in a perpendicular fashion, about 2/3 along the way from the tip. Remember, the pronation and supination motion is important when you're putting the needle into the tissue. Start about 3 millimeters away from the wound edge, go about 3 millimeters deep, and exit 3 millimeters on the other side away from the wound edge. The needle is removed, pulling it out along the curve of the needle. The suture is then pulled through the tissue. For your first throw, it's a double loop that you create. The tail end is picked up with the needle driver and pulled through the loops. Notice your arms are crossed on the first throw. A single loop is now made for your next throw. The tail end is picked up and pulled through this loop, and your arms uncrossed now pull in opposite directions to snug the knot down tightly. Final loop is made around the needle driver. Tail end is picked up, and then crossing your arms, the knot is snugly tied down, and your assistant cuts the suture. Notice that the sutures are 1 centimeter apart, lying flat on the tissue. This ends the demonstration.